lecture in the series on the problem of free will. I'm going to kind of whip through the beginning again just real quick, and then we'll carry on by starting to look at David Hume and his ideas of causation and some compatibilism and different categories of thought on free will. Basically, the way this is going to go is I'm trying to get you to understand sort of the fundamental metaphysical problem here, which is kind of beyond our ability to test with science, which is, whether or not our will is ultimately caused in such a way that we can only ever, do one possible thing. Whether that's, from external impulses, from, the nurture nature thing does not really apply to this situation because, nature and nurture are really part of the same, causal factor that influence what we think and help us to determine what it is we're going to do. And in some thinking, it may actually tell us what we're going to do, but we'll carry on with that. So first we're going to start with the metaphysical problem of the problem of free will. And then we're going to take a hard look at the compatibilists who try to kind of bridge the gap between a need for a predictable universe, right, a predictable physical universe, and the need for, freedom on our own behalf, that we can make decisions and be responsible for what it is that we do. So you get those two concepts. So the compatibilist works on putting those together. We're particularly going to look at David Hume. I asked you to read David Hume. I hope you've had a chance to. He's difficult, but interesting. So, right. And then, using that, we're going to get into some epistemological issues that come from sort of metaphysical problems with determining causation, which I think, everybody kind of ought to learn. Along with probability. Everybody needs to know probability theory. Okay. So the problem of free will, which is how do we have free will if we are just a part of a universe that seems to otherwise be pretty much determined? Okay. What is free will? Well, seems to be the idea that we are capable of making decisions. Sometimes it is depicted as the ability to have done otherwise or to do otherwise. That I literally could have done A or B at, time t1. But that's the way we have to act, at least, given our, position and our understanding of time in the universe. And besides, people get really, really annoyed at us if we don't act like we have free will. We stand around waiting for the universe to tell us whether we should order chocolate or vanilla ice cream. One thing for certain, everybody's going to get irritated behind you and the person waiting on you. So remember, again, this is a term of art, just very general. Now, we are influenced all the time. We are pressured all the time, via whether commercials or whether it's our families, whether it is, what we're reading. Things influence how we think and what we think we should do. That doesn't mean that our will is not free, though, because it's at the very center, at the very core, it is still you. And you get to decide what you're going to do with all these inputs that you're getting from the exterior world. They can be very strong. And, in some cases, it's very easy to understand, why you felt pretty much, that's what you had to do without a doubt. But right now, but we're looking at just this necessary sort of metaphysical little point at the decision-making process where we could have done otherwise, at the very least. Okay. All right, I'm going to have to re-record all this. because somebody needs instructions on how to let dough rise. Oh, actually, maybe. Okay, so the problem of free will is that it seems to be the case that people are capable of acting freely. We feel like we're capable of acting freely. I'm standing in the grocery store, I'm trying to pick, which kind of peanut butter do I want to buy? And I feel like I could choose this one, I could choose that one, I could choose to walk out of the store without peanut butter. And I feel equally capable of all three. And it's just up to my own will to determine what it is I'm actually going to do. Number 2, determinism is true. The universe is entirely governed by causal laws. Everything accelerates to the same, sort of rate when it's being dropped through the atmosphere. Okay, there is some evidence that gravity, in sort of very micro measurements, is different in different places on the planet, and I guess that would ultimately influence the speed at which we fall, free fall, that is. But it's pretty subtle. But even that, we can figure out where that is and how that's going to change what's going on. This is thinking about almost a very Newtonian kind of universe, a very billiard ball model kind of universe where one thing happens, then another, then another, then another, and everything is ultimately predictable. And then there's the idea that, well, if we go by what it is that it seems that we can know, right, then we are just as much a part of the universe as a rock. And we're just a really, really fancy rock. And we're just as subject to causal laws as the stone, as a rock is, right? We can push the rock over, we can be pushed over. Our strength is limited, and we can wedge things and so on. But we are also part of the universe and subject to the same causal laws as everything else. We're going to have the same kind of momentum dependent on our mass, and so on. So it seems to be the case that acting freely, really being able to do otherwise, is incompatible with a causally determined universe that we are a part of. Okay. I've shown you Laplace's demon. The interesting thing to think about with Laplace's demon is the idea of, we look at this model, right? And here's our branching space-time going off into these other areas where we would have made other decisions. But to Laplace's demon, it just looks like one long arrow. That's it. Laplace never imagines these or sees these because this is what everything looks like. Okay, we may regard the present state of the universe as the effect of its past and the cause of its future, an intellect which at a certain moment would know all forces that set nature in motion, and all positions of all items of which nature is composed. If this intellect were also vast enough to submit these data to analysis, it would embrace in a single formula the movements of the greatest bodies of the universe and those of the tiniest atom. For such an intellect, nothing would be uncertain, and the future, just like the past, would be present before its eyes. Yeah, the present thing, I guess that's a slight pun. Especially if you think about, so the Epicurean model of the universe, right? They're just atoms moving in space. at different velocities, and they kind of wiggle around and they bump into each other and make things happen. And that's where human beings and the rest of the universe come from. Lucretius used the existence of Brownian motion to explain how atoms move, and that atoms, move, and in unpredictable ways, the same way that, dust motes, something that's in solution and so forth, moves very, very slightly. Okay, just trying to, get this thought in your head. Okay, usually this is where I begin the second lecture, which is, this is entirely and only a symbol of the fact that I spend way too much time on the interwebs. I did not make that. Okay, so there's considered to be like at least three major schools of thought on the problem of free will. The first one is called hard determinism. The universe is determined, and so is our will. Free will is only illusory. It's argued that behaviorists, think this way, especially with regard to, input and output, stimulus and response, that our response is necessarily fixed to a given stimulus. And the eliminative materialist, which just, believes we're all, again, big fancy rocks. Thomas Hobbes believed that. Thomas Hobbes believed that. Baron Dolbach believed that. John Calvin actually, believed that, and it was a part of, the Calvinist religion that you accept that, God has complete control over you and the universe and yourself, right? You don't have any free will, which is it might be interesting if somebody feels like exploring, they're welcome to do so. Taking a look at Calvinism. So there's a guy by the name of John Watson. I think he's considered to be the first behaviorist. He was up at Johns Hopkins. He boasted, he was first of the behaviorists, give me a dozen healthy infants, well-formed, and my own specified world to bring them up in, and I'll guarantee to take anyone at random, any of these babies at random, and train him to become any type of specialist I might select. Doctor, lawyer, artist, merchant chief, and yes, even beggarman and thief. Regardless of his talents, penchants, tendencies, abilities, vocations, and race of his ancestors. So Watson thought very, highly of his ability to control behavior. Those of you who studied psychology have probably heard about the story of John Watson and little Albert, where somebody actually, God forbid, did let him get a hold of a small child, and he tried to, give stimulus to the child in such a way that he would get the child to not play with rats, not play with white rats. So John Watson would put the kid down in a room with a white rat on the floor, and he would be curious and go over and try to pet the rat, and whenever the kid went over to the rat, there would be a loud noise would go off. Really just something to make it startle you real bad. Very scary for a small child. And little Albert would cry, and I guess when he went away from the mouse, that they'd stop the sound or whatever. So eventually, Albert began to express fear of the fear of the white rat. And what they found was actually that I guess it's a case of transference, or sort of a generalization, where actually little Albert was afraid of all kinds of white and fluffy things, including Santa Claus and his grandfather's beard. And I imagine Easter, was probably a right horror to the thing, to the poor little fellow. Well, Nevertheless, it's worth noting John Watson was actually very influential, ultimately using his ideas um, in cooperation with the, I believe, Folger Coffee Company. He, uh, there was a scandal. He was dating an undergraduate or graduate student, and he had to leave. So he went to what we call Madison Avenue. He went into commercial um, graphics, selling things, writing ads and so forth. And it said that he helped to create the coffee break. The coffee break did not exist before the coffee break ad campaign that John Watson um, apparently, was behind, really helped to write. So he did have some influence, even though sometimes we make fun of the behaviorists and their little rats with their little levers. But anyway. Okay. An eliminative materialist is somebody who just believes the world is all that is the case. That there is nothing supernatural outside the world or anything else. Everything is just molecules bouncing off each other. Okay. So there's another idea of determinism too. So there's physical determinism, which is what we were thinking about before. And then there's this other idea of, God as an omnipotent, omniscient being, right? That part of omnipotence that grants God the power to know everything. So God knows everything that's happened in the universe, that is happening in the universe right now. So God also knows what we're going to do. God ostensibly knows what we're thinking, and so on. So God knows what we're going to do. In God's view of the universe, our actions and will are determined. God is Laplace's demon. That single line that traces from the past through the present to the future. It's just all one line, and you can go back and forth. You can take states of the universe in the past and interpolate them into states of the future, and you can look at states of the future world and use that to determine what the past was, or rather use it to calculate basically what the past would have looked like. Okay. So there's a potential conflict here where, is it the case that we can argue that we have free will if God is capable of predicting everything that it is that we're going to do? And there's a good argument to say, actually, we can have free will as we know it. It's just that, God being the creator of the whole universe can see everything else is going to happen, and we're kind of a part of that. But to us, we're making a choice. So that does appear to be oh, sorry, I was thinking about Calvinism. So there's, a problem with whether or not we can have free will if we think that God completely knows what it is we're ever going to do, right? And there's a distinction to be made between prediction and determinism. I really like chocolate, so that I really like chocolate, and I'm waiting in line to order ice cream, and I'm going to order chocolate ice cream. And you can feel pretty firmly that I'm going to order chocolate ice cream because I like chocolate ice cream. It's just what I'm going to do. And I can, be very predictable. And many people are very predictable for the most part, right? And you'll know that I'll walk up and ask for ice cream and not pizza or something else. And this is how we have, communication and interactions with each other. We'll look at that a little bit more with David Hume. So determinism seems to be a threat to our ability to have free will, that the universe is very law-like in its nature. Okay. Now, then there's the libertarian view, which says the universe is not determined and our will is free. Or the universe is determined, but our will is free due to it being independent of physical laws in some way. So that, there's that first assertion that there's maybe, something that is irreducibly undetermined, but that just kind of argues for randomness. It's not so much as our will being free. An additional requirement of our will being free is we have to have control over it. The more interesting libertarian is the one that says, I actually don't know anybody who espouses the first idea. That doesn't mean they don't exist. I just don't know of anyone that I could think of. The universe is determined, but our will is free due to it being independent of physical laws. And the first version of this is called, dualism or mind-body dualism. That'll be our next unit. It's called Cartesian substance dualism. And then that's separating the mind in the body into different substantive materials. We're going to have the res extensa, which is, the stuff of the physical universe that has extension, and possesses dimension. And then there's going to be the res cognita, which is the thought stuff, which does not take up any mass and takes up no space in the universe whatsoever. It doesn't possess a dimension. So Descartes thinks that we can escape, this problem of physical determinism, at least, with this mind-body dualism. And he postulates separate stuff. And there's other philosophers later on who are going to talk about mind as emergent property of brain. Not so much a separate substance, but that rather, when the entire brain is working together, the experience of the mind, the consciousness, sort of arises from it as this just sort of additional property. The way I said that, it sounds like epiphenomenalism, but so we can split it up into, wait. That's the words I was looking for. Emergence, in this case, not like an emergency, but something that emerges. An emergent property is something that is greater than the sum of its parts. So you can... So the idea is that the mind is this emergent property of the activity of the brain. And we can argue for it, literally existing, which would be, the ontological emergent property of the brain activity. Or we could be talking about sort of an epistemological dualism, where we pretty much we come to know and understand the mind as a property of the brain, but that it's not, it's capable of reasoning outside of normal causation. So this is probably, the most, this is the one I think we most operate with, in day-to-day life. That, we're going to drop a ball, it's going to fall at the same rate. I know well enough that, about the nature of the laws of the universe, that someone, throws a ball to me, I could, maybe 5 times out of 10, I could catch it. If I drop a pen, I can predict where it's going to go, or a drop of water, what it's going to do, and so on. to a certain extent. It's also called interactionism, where there's this part of that the mind is, sort of separate from the body in a way, and the mind gets information from the body, and it goes, I think I'm going to put my left foot down, and it gives the instructions back to the body, and the body puts the left foot down. Okay. I tried to do a diagram, and this one is my diagram, so this is wholly my fault, trying to get these ideas across. However I can. So hard determinism, here we have stimulus coming in from the universe, and it's going to go, that's why the brain's kind of a ring, because it's just going to kind of bounce around in there a little bit and then come right back out as whatever activity or whatever thing it is we're going to say, the action that results from, this long causal chain that has come to bring about the state of affairs that we're going to do a particular thing. The libertarians, on the other hand, they believe that somewhere in here we're actually free, that there's nothing that can influence this to the degree that it is predetermined what you're going to do. This is your mind or your consciousness, that little bit of you that is free to go, wait a minute, I'm not ordering that again. I was sick for 3 days. I don't care what you say about it. That part of you that's really free, going this way. And the compatibilist believes that there are, the universe is determined, but they're agnostic, which is to say they say that they don't know, or they can't know. Are we completely determined, or are we completely free? And the compatibilist says, well, dunno, which is why it's an opaque circle, because we can't really see kind of what's going on here. And the compatibilist says, well, I know that these things happened, and this is what the person did, right? And mostly what the compatibilist is interested in is this part right here, right? What did you do? What are you responsible for? They're not interested in whether or not this is caused or uncaused, right? They don't care about that. They're just interested in, what you did. So, and David Hume's going to express this idea. Okay. And here's David Hume. David Hume, early modern philosopher, profound skeptic. He had some really interesting ideas, and he very much spurred Kant. Kant said that David Hume woke him from his dogmatic slumbers, his view of the universe, and his demands and challenges. He was a very, very smart guy. He did not make his money, however, as a professor. He was known in his time for having produced a vast encyclopedia that was the history of Britain at that time. And that's where he really made his money. He wanted to teach at the University of Edinburgh, but they were really concerned that he wasn't really a very religious person. He never openly espoused atheism in his lifetime, and in fact is said at some points to, say, okay, yeah, God's cool, whatever. And but it wasn't enough that the Edinburgh, only wanted to hire good religious people at that time, and he didn't fit their bill. Okay. Well, let's see. I think I told you at one point about the philosophy pickup lines, which are, hey, baby, you want to see my form of the good? This is very Platonic, in a weird way. It's, my form of the good, which is, non-justifying. No, that's not the right one. I blew it. Okay, anyway. I have philosophy breakup lines down here in the notes on this slide. Just because we're always together doesn't mean we belong together. And, this will make more sense after we look at Humean causation. And the Humean breakup line, part 2, relationships need to be about more than just constant conjoining. These are from a guy by the name of Paul Addy. Okay. So lived from 1711 to 1776. And the odd thing is that we actually would never have really known about David Hume, who's gone on to have a definite, profound, influence over the development of, so-called Western philosophy, except that, Kant read some of what David Hume wrote and was just absolutely excited by it, and really felt like David Hume had raised some serious challenges that needed to be met. So that's how we've come to know David Hume, which is just kind of interesting. Okay. So David Hume was a British empiricist. He believed that all the information that we have comes to us through our senses. That when we're born, I think it was, John Locke, I believe, who says that, we're born tabula rasa, right? It was a blank slate. And it's our experience in the world, the things that we perceive through our senses that give us any knowledge, that we possess whatsoever, and all the knowledge that we ultimately possess. And that there's nothing intrinsic that we actually have with regard to whatever it is we can know about the universe. It comes exclusively through our senses. So we have perceptions, from our senses, right? Or really sensations, and then we get a hold of those, and then our mind and brain kind of work together to make them into some understandable part of the universe. I see a red blob over there, and my mind and my eyes and my brain working together make it into a red square. And if as I keep looking at it, I can start to see that there's perhaps curves on it, and everything all together works to make an image for me of a three-dimensional lamp. In my head, I can imagine the space that this lamp takes up, that I actually see that. But it comes all from just looking at the lamp. And everything that we have in our mind and so forth and so on comes from experience. So he is an empiricist that's going to stand, in opposition to René Descartes. He talked about, that the mind is better known than the body, right? And David Hume would have, known about Descartes and read Descartes. So, that's in his head. And so Descartes is part of the, that rationalist stream that believes that it is knowledge that we possess in the mind that comes from the abstract world, which is our contact with, real truth. And certainly Descartes believed in innate ideas. He argued that God has to exist because Descartes has a thought of perfection. And he said, there is nothing in the world that is perfect. There is nothing in the world that could give me the idea of perfection. So that idea had to have been put in my head by God, so that I would understand God, that God is effectively, giving him this comparative value so that we can understand God as a perfect being, or at least the possibility of perfection. So one of the things that David Hume was very concerned about was causation. And he made this observation, or really lack thereof, that when we say that one thing causes another, we cannot know with absolute certainty that it does. That what we can see limits what we can ultimately claim about the matter at hand. So this sort of like necessary skepticism between a cause and effect. We can always be wrong, no matter how much we think we know what's going on. Okay. There is nothing in any object considered in itself which can afford us a reason for drawing a conclusion beyond it. Even after the observation of the frequent or constant conjunction of objects, we have no reason to draw any inference concerning any object beyond those of which we've had experience. So, imagine, if you will, I think it's Newton's cradle, right? The executive desk game with the balls hanging from little strings, and if you pull one back, it hits the whole string, and the first one flies off. Fun little thing to play around with, for momentum, and basically passing of energy from one thing to another. I'm forgetting the word I want right there. So let's imagine that, I've got two balls and I'm swinging them. Maybe two marbles on strings, and I'm swinging them at each other, right? So they're going whack, 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 and bouncing off each other. So what is the cause of them bouncing back, right? You say, well, because they're hitting each other. And I say, no, according to Hume, the best thing I can say is that I see them going towards each other. I hear this whacking noise when they get really close together, and then they bounce apart from each other again. So there's this constant conjunction. There's these two things that happen simultaneously with something I observed, and I infer from that the one thing is causing the other. This cracking noise and the balls bouncing backwards is coming from them slamming together. And that every time I slam them together, I'm going to hear this cracking noise, and they're going to bounce off each other. And I'm going to do that over and over and over again. But at best, all I could say is when I swing them together, this thing seems to occur, that it makes a cracking noise, and that they bounce off one another. It's a counterintuitive idea. And I'm not sure I'm explaining it as well as I could. Okay. Well, we'll carry on, and hopefully it'll eventually make sense. So there's this relationship that we have with things in the universe, that we observe them, and they're usually pretty predictable, right? We use the word cause, but according to David Hume, that's really just kind of an inference. We're not actually recognizing 100% what the real cause is. But it's sufficient, right? It's sufficient for us to be able to make predictions that, about the nature of the world around us, that we can, pick things up and throw and catch things, and, we can drive cars and be able to estimate, velocity and direction of other cars so that we can not slam into them, and so on. And arguably, all the information that we have, the physical information that we have, has led to a great many innovations, our technological innovations. And, even though there might be a little necessary kind of doubt that we should possess about completely understanding causation, we can do an awful lot with that. Okay, so this is what Hume is going to call the doctrine of necessity. That one thing is necessarily related to something else, and the necessity to him is imposed by us. Sort of making a leap beyond what it is we actually can perceive. So we have the doctrine of necessity. By observing the constant conjunction of events, we infer that one is the cause of the other. So I'm repeatedly striking a match on a matchbox, that little sandpaper on the side, and by striking the match, I cause the match to go on fire, right? That's the way we would interpret that. And there's this constant conjunction of me rubbing the match pretty fast against the side and it producing a flame. So we say that one perhaps causes the other. Does human behavior also follow the doctrine of necessity? Okay. There's a quote down here in the notes. If you want to look at the PowerPoint later, I think you can get to it. Here's a quote from David Hume expressing this causation idea again. If we examine the operations of body and the production of effects from their causes, we shall find that all our faculties, which is to say all of our senses, all our abilities, can never carry us farther in our knowledge of this relation than barely to observe that particular objects are constantly conjoined together, and that the mind is carried by a customary transition from the appearance of one to the belief of the other. For him, saying that something causes something else is an expression of a belief, not really an observed fact about the world. You can argue that you see constant conjunction between these things, but what causes something else, we can't really, in his mind, know for sure. So the doctrine of necessity says that the universe is predictable, basically. The universe behaves in a very law-like fashion, and we can use our information, our experience that we've had prior, along with our memory, to be able to predict things that are going to happen in the future, right? I know that if I take this rock and I fling it real hard at that glass, it's probably going to break it, or in my case, probably going to miss. But if I hit it with the rock, it will break, right? I have to have that little predictive ability. So remember, this is sort of an expression of that idea of physical determinism. And it's sort of seen as a threat to our ability to be able to sort of be free, right? Be able to make free choices. But David Hume sees it differently. He says we actually need, oddly enough, the doctrine of necessity. We need the universe to be predictable. And otherwise our choices and things would be completely meaningless. Okay. He says, not only is the universe deterministic, note he is not claiming that it is determined, that it seems to be deterministic. We expect determinism to work in our interactions with other people, right? He says, actually, it works a lot with regard to other people too, right? And he notes that human behavior has not changed throughout history. He in the work that I asked you to read, he talks about some of the previous, the ancient Greek writers, that we can be emotionally moved by what we read about people thousands of years ago living in a very different way in a very different part of the world, with very, vastly different social experience, but nevertheless, they can move us to tears as well. So, there has to be some, great similarity between humans and human behavior. And we pretty much haven't changed ultimately throughout history in a lot of ways. We care about our families. We get upset when someone in our family is harmed. Um, Especially with the tragic plays. I'm not sure how well the comedies worked out, though. Aristophanes did basically write a fart joke about Socrates into his famous comedic work, The Frogs. It was also contemporary with Socrates, which is to say, he probably saw it. One hopes. Anyway, so human interactions are mostly predictable. And when they're not predictable, we don't assume that determinism has failed, right? We assume there's just some factor we don't know. Let's suppose I'm trying to strike a match on a box, and this particular match, I can't get it to strike. Do I think that causation, has failed? Do I think that, that this constant conjunction, I assume that there's something I don't know about this match or about the box. Maybe it's starting to rain and everything's wet, and so on. So, also, talking about the idea that human interactions are mostly predictable. So you say hi to your friend, and every day your friend's kind of cheerful with you, and then one day they're like really just cross, right? They're short, they're grumpy. You don't assume that they've changed, right? You don't assume that the universe has changed and, things don't follow in a law-like fashion one from the other. You think something's going on with your friend that you just don't know about, right? And they might have a toothache. They might have been reading the news. I think he even talks, David Hume talks about them maybe being hangry, that they're cross because they're hungry, and so on. So, but we expect our interactions with other people to be pretty predictable. Hi, how are you? I'm fine. How are you? We don't. And have you ever noticed how every time you ask somebody, what you doing, no matter what they're doing, even if they're like, about to push down the bar to, set off a bunch of dynamite, they'll say, "Oh, I'm nothing. I'm not doing anything." And it's not that they're lying, but there's just something about that particular question. So, "Oh, what you doing?" Nothing. That's the way we interact, whether having absolutely nothing to do with what we are not doing at the present time. Though I can understand plausible deniability if you're about to blow up a bunch of dynamite. Okay. Compatibilism generally. So remember, David Hume is a compatibilist. He believes that the universe is, well, pretty determined, right? It's deterministic, to the best of our abilities that we can tell. It seems to be pretty determined, right? But it's an inference that we're making, but it's still, good enough that we can create cars and airplanes and computers and, different flavored gummies, all these kinds of things out of our understanding of the universe. But he felt that we also still have, free will of a sort, that we can make choices, and we are best understood in that way too. Compatibilism was also called soft determinism, later by the American philosopher William James. And it's better than trying to argue that the will is uncaused in some way, because it gives us the ability to resolve issues of moral responsibility, for instance. His way of looking at the what do we call this here? his way of looking at his way of describing the relationship between how free we are. He talks about us being at liberty, which means that we are able to act on our will. Okay. So whether your will is in some way free, right, doesn't tell us, or if you are determined in some way, it doesn't tell us whether or not you did whatever it was you did, or who did it. But compatibilism sort of skips a step when it comes to looking at this causation model. It just doesn't worry about what's in between. Okay. This will make sense. To the extent that our actions are determined by our choices, they are done freely. To say that something causes something else means that, in our experience, the occurrence of the first thing is customarily followed by the occurrence of the second. To say that someone acts, quote, freely, unquote, means simply that a person's action follows from choice or active will. So I guess, the idea that our will causes us to do things, there just seems to be a constant conjunction between, this thought that we have that, vanilla ice cream would be really good right now, and ordering vanilla ice cream. And that, but that's an inference we make. But anyway, when he's talking about being at liberty, he means that we are free to act on our own impulses. Okay. So we have the doctrine of necessity. By observing the constant conjunction of events, we infer that one is the cause of the other. And then we have the doctrine of liberty. So liberty is acting in accord with our will. We are not at liberty if we are being forced in some way to act against our will, whether we're being physically restrained or maybe being constrained via, coercion. He said, tell me whether or not they are imprisoned or in chains. But he does recognize that, we can be influenced to a great degree with emotional kinds of, pressure, let's say. Like they say, you have to do this, or, because we're holding your dog hostage and we're going to kill your dog. Okay, I think I'm going to stop that here, and there will be like one last lecture, I think, in this series. Okay, which way did it go?